I'd rather die penniless with a ton of social capital than anything, probably.
Yeah. The attendance list on at your funeral is extremely long. Well, that sounds like a life well lived. Hello and welcome to Unqualified Advice, an entertaining show for entertainment purposes. Join us as we talk about running our businesses, what we've been learning, and how we're applying lessons from academia and real life as entrepreneurs and investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Topics discussed represent opinions represented by parties with different circumstances than your own and should not be taken as advice. Any discussion of securities or other investments should not be relied upon as investment advice. Consult your personal financial advisor and perform your own due diligence. Podcast hosts, guests, and clients of Fig Social Capital may own positions in securities discussed in this podcast. A non-paid placement for goldbelly.com.
Well, we weren't. Thankfully, we hadn't clicked record yet, so I guess nobody's going to know what exactly we mean when we say gold belly. But yeah, no.
Our pre-record session was basically bagels, where to get them, what to do with them when you order too many.
Yes, and how to work them off, aka looking forward to a post-bagel, run.
Yeah, you got to wait a couple hours.
Yeah. Or maybe just the next day, It's just get all your bagels out on Saturday, then just run all day Sunday or whatever.
There you go. Yeah. Speaking of running all day, the Ironman World Championship is happening right now.
Oh,
4 or 5. Yeah, it starts in like 7 minutes, I think.
How is that advertised? How is that broadcast?
Streaming, maybe? I don't know. I got a text since I have signed up for an official thing now. I get notifications about this stuff. I have never, ever in my life noticed or seen.
Okay, I was going to say, is this something you've watched previously? So nope. No, this is a purely cross-promotional Ironman.
Yeah.
Product. They're trying to get you
go through my email before talking to you, and I'm like, oh, I could watch that this morning.
Yeah.
That's how that worked. I really just want to see the biking part.
I mean,
I feel like the swim will be like an overhead shot and just like some splashing in the water. Like not much to see.
Well, yeah, like even during the Olympics, swimming with even the underwater cameras, it's only, I don't know, especially at distance, like certain distance sports, it's hard to be particularly captivating for, I think, long periods of time. I don't know. I think auto racing works because you have crashes, maybe. But even then, there can be some really boring stretches. Yeah,
especially when you're not in tune with like strategy and stuff like that. Like if you pay attention to the nitty gritty details, you can kind of get more entertained, I would say. But you have to be into that kind of stuff to begin with.
Yeah, I think you have to really be a car guy or a triathlete to appreciate certain events, right?
Like I think I look at basketball and football this way. Like I'm not interested, and I haven't really ever been. But I think a lot of people grew up doing those sports, loved doing them, still love doing them. And therefore you want to watch the professionals, right? Like some of it is team and energy and community. But I think that ultimately there's another part of it is just like, I like to watch people that are like 1,000 times better than me do the thing. And so, yeah, I haven't got into triathlon and always loving motorsport and cars from an extremely young age. Yeah, like I love watching that stuff.
Well, that's fair.
You just want to watch the people that are at the pinnacle,
I think same thing. Like, well, any sport really, like baseball, soccer, football. I think what you played as a kid probably has a lot to do with what people enjoyed watching, to some degree.
To some degree, I would say, like, having been to Super Bowl parties in my life and stuff, and showing up to the party and not even knowing who's playing the Super Bowl. That's me. Yeah. But is a Super Bowl party fun? Yeah, because everyone else is into it. It's like good energy and stuff.
It's the community aspect of it on that side 100%. Where that's why like stand-up comedy, going out to see it is more fun than just listening to it on, Spotify or something.
Yeah, I can imagine some sets that I saw at Comedy Cellar right? Like it was around the corner from my apartment. And so we would go, and I'm sure, well, drinks had to do some of it. And then just the energy of being in the room where it's like, if I watched this on my screen at home, would I be laughing as hard at this particular joke than I did in person there with surrounded by other people? I don't
No,
think so.
because you get the feedback loop of the other people egging you on, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then like sometimes like, and even like watching something with just somebody some people you like on a couch, you can get that happening. Like I'll start laughing at my wife laughing, or she'll start laughing at me laughing, and we'll be laughing at each other laughing, type of thing. So
that contagion's really good for the soul. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels fun. Like it's just it's the shared experience, which is I think something in some ways that in one of the topics we wanted to talk about today, I think it is something
Segues
that
right
lacks
into
often.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And what Sean's talking about is,
I was gonna say maybe that's a good way. Maybe that's a good time to step in and transition in here to one of the topics you had outlined, Dan. I'm gonna you provided a nice little set list today, so I'm gonna let you kick us off with the description, or kind of where your head's at, and why this is on your mind.
Yeah. Well, it's on my mind because I think I'm going to make a bold statement. I don't know if it's true. It's how I feel. Is if you could address the problems that men and young men face today, you might significantly improve the political outcomes that we're seeing. I think there's a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And from that anger is populism. And from populism, you get to bad things, right? So my conjecture is some of this is coming from the alienation and the loneliness that men in particular are feeling these days. And this is coming from a place of like following a guy named Richard Reeves, who wrote a book called Of Boys and Men.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think you have mentioned that book previously. I have not picked it up yet.
Barack Obama put it on his of the best books he read in his list of the best books he read in 2024. And that's not to, point sides or anything like that. I think any male with some brain cells should, kind of like plug into this, because so to plug another podcast episode, Richard Reeves appeared on Modern Wisdom, and I listened to that yesterday or the day before. And in that episode, Chris referenced a previous episode that he hosted maybe 18 months ago with Christine Imba. Christine Imba is on Richard Reeves' board. So all these things are like connecting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Christine Imba had posted a video or something like that, and Chris referenced the top, when he looked at it, the top comment, which was like, I'm not going to get it at all word for word, but effectively that comment was like, things seem fine to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was upvoted a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know these anonymous, semi-anonymous comments.
Yeah.
But could that have been a 55-year-old guy who watched the video about the deterioration of the fabric amongst men, and him looking around from his life being like, things look fine here, and a bunch of other men feeling the same way, but probably from the same age cohort.
Yeah, I would say that there's some generational alignment.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Because go ask any guy in their ask most guys in their 50s how things are going. You're going to get a distribution of answers, and I think that the top of that bell curve is going to be, things are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask a 23-year-old guy the same question, I think you're going to get a very different looking distribution.
And I think that's interesting that you in telling that's your perception, and I don't inherently disagree. But when I think of a lot of the anger that I see in certain spheres, I would think, or I would say that some of it is from the more boomer age folks on certain, at least on mass media. But I don't disagree that in terms of a mental health outcomes, I think that and I think
suicide rates.
Yeah, exactly. And suicide rates, it's tougher for the younger generation. I listened to some of a podcast Dan shared with me by Chris Williamson, his Modern Wisdom podcast, with Richard Reeves on it, and they talked about suicide rates increasing among certain age cohorts in men. Do you have any more sense of the details on that? I haven't had a chance to kind of go look at
I think
his research.
Suicide amongst the young is up across the board. Doesn't matter how, you split it up socioeconomically, you split it up by gender, it doesn't matter. It's up across the board, which is really dangerous. It's scary, and a failure, I think, in many ways. But there's a lot more press on women, female. And this is where talking about this topic gets really hard. And I think Richard Reeves does a really good job of it. Way, 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 way better than I will ever be able to. Because he balances the demands of both sides. And you're going into a space where men, I think, don't really have any role models to look up to anymore. And the few that exist are kind of terrible. I think I've mentioned the name Andrew Tate before. He gets tons, he's basically a human trafficker. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the louder and highly followed people on the internet that is giving a masculine vibe. And he's straight up toxic masculinity defined in my mind. But too much pressure has been put against masculinity to which you can't even have positive masculinity in some circles. Right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
and so you're asking.
There's no such thing as masculinity anymore. It's just toxic masculinity.
Right. There's no other option. Right. Or, I mean, I heard this is anecdata, but a guy opens a door, holds it for some lady passing through, and then gets a quick little lecture about how that's chauvinistic and wrong. I was I don't know. It's a nice thing to do.
Did I tell you the story? Man, it was just the icing on a cake of a really bad day, actually. I was at a bank after trying to close out my father's account. I had gone 7 times that day. Chase was having some difficulties.
Yeah.
And I went to open the door for, there was this older lady that was leaving the bank and had a little cart that she was pulling, and I kind of reached it and pushed the door open for her, so she because her hands were all tied up, and then she just went off on me because I didn't touch her, but I apparently violated some closeness rule that I wasn't aware of, and she just started yelling at me, and the security guard had to come, and I was just backing away, God. And I was just trying to be nice.
I know. Yeah. I mean, so
and I'm sorry, I did not mean to spook you. I felt terrible because clearly I had distressed her. But yeah, man, sometimes it's doing the.
And you don't know what kind of trauma she has in her past, and these things could be extremely real. I'm not trying to discount any of it.
I felt bad. I'm not saying she was in the wrong or anything. I think I was equal. I clearly did something that said wasn't appropriate or something in her mindset. But sometimes just trying to be nice can blow up in your face.
Oh man.
I'm sorry. What you said reminded me of that story. I thought I would
100%. But in one's lived experience, you go out into the world and this happens more and more. Aren't those sets of incentives set to push men away and down? Away from participation, right? And one of Reeves's main points is most of the male suicides. Males are much better at executing suicide, right? That's been that way. That's always been that way, and will always be that way. But it is we use much more intense violence to get the job done, and it's done.
Less half measures.
I don't know that I'd agree with that.
Or is it just more firearms, access to firearms?
More firearms. I don't know if it's access to firearms. I mean, I think if you decide, I don't know. Yeah. I can't get there. I don't. It's not a thought pattern that I've been blessed to not really go down that road. But So because the absolute numbers of suicides in males are actually higher, and drug overdoses have, I guess, again, I'm piggybacking off of a lot of Reeves statistics that I don't have off the top of my head here, but since drugs are a big part of it, and I think one of his points is like, if you talk to a different generation, it's not that those drugs didn't exist. They definitely existed. People did them. Some people died from them. But two variables seem to be kind of true. One, they weren't laced with fentanyl back then. And two, opioids and the sort of drugs of despair and loneliness weren't the popular ones necessarily. It was socially doing marijuana. It was socially doing cocaine. These other drugs that are part of being with others. And if something goes wrong, you have people around you who perhaps will fix the situation or at least call for help.
Unless they're also strung out on LSD and don't know.
These are real considerations.
Yeah.
But if you're doing heroin alone and you overdose, you're done. If you're doing heroin alone and it's laced with way too much fentanyl, you're done. And so there's this like part of the drug culture that seems to be more lonely as well, right? And it's not death by a thousand cuts, but it's not just pick one thing. It's this cacophony of 8 things are contributing to a steep increase in bad outcomes. Unfortunate things.
Yeah. So while you were speaking there, I just pulled up some data from the CDC. And it's, from 2000 to 2018, more or less just a straight line trend up from a rate of about 10 suicide per 100,000 up to 14. Wow. Little dip down into 2020 and then back to 2022 up to 14 per 100,000. So just to give a sense of the scale.
40% increase over 4 years?
Yeah, 40% increase. But also, and still, 14 per 100,000 is a small number, like per 100,000, but it's still, that's a huge increase.
Is it? How do we compare to, is it? How do we compare to,
I don't know.
Pick two opposite sort of, but advanced Argentina and Holland.
That's true. Let's see if I can find anything on.
And that 14 was male only. That 14 was male only or total?
So I do have a breakdown of males 23, females 6.
Wow.
Yep. So huge disparity.
Wow.
This is data from the CDC from 2022. Interesting trend in here. You want to see the age breakdown?
Yeah, show it. I also want to see it. Like, has that gap, been maintained, or is the gap widening?
So 85 and plus the highest, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think end of life trends down.
How many of those are voluntary? I wonder.
Exactly. Or 65 to 74, anyway. 75 to 84, the trend comes down. 65 to 74, the trend comes down to 16. And then it starts to go back up as you get into the midlife groove of 55 to 64, highest at 45 to 54 in the midlife area, and then dips at 35 to 44. But here, this is what's interesting, the 25 to 34. I'd like to know this data for previous years, right? To see how the shape of this distribution changed over 10, 20 years. I think that would be an interesting thing to look up at some point. I'm not going to do that today, but yeah. So there's that. And then what else did you want to see, Dan? You said?
Yeah, the sex disparity. I was just wondering how the sex disparity changed over time.
I don't think that has it in this data.
Yeah. Because it's interesting to talk about this. I think it's a topic that needs to be talked about more, and it's on my mind, but it's like on my mind locally, right? It has recently crossed my path, and it's something that I'm curious about. But there's always recency bias to look for, and are some maybe not the absolute numbers, but sort of the relative numbers, are they static? Like, has it been this way for 40 years? Like, I don't know. The way Reeves talks about it, the way Scott Galloway talks about it, it would seem like it isn't. It seems like it's a worsening problem. But
Well, I think it is clearly from the data we saw from the U.S. at least. That's a 40% increase. Even a small number is still a 40% increase, right? Or I shouldn't say small. That's
no. I mean, per
reductions,
100,000 people, we've got 50 million people here.
Yep. So take that times 10, 20. Wait, I can't do math all of a sudden.
Lop 5 zeros off.
8. So 14 times 3,000 is your number. So 30,000.
42,000.
42,000.
So that's annually?
Yeah. So that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. There was a lot. I think Reeves put it in a way that like was a real banger. I think it was Reeves. It was something about like, if you chop up the years, right? Or like since COVID, he's trying to capture this like increase. If you just take the male suicides in the United States, we lost the same number of people over those 5 years that we did in the entirety of World War One. Mm-hmm. So it was something. I'm directionally right.
Yeah. Basically, talking about the overall scale, you don't understand how large the scale of the issue is, I guess.
Yeah, and I think in the popular mind, we may not know the number, but we have an idea that World War One, World War Two, Vietnam War, these were extremely costly in terms of lives.
Yes.
But when we talk about suicides and it's like, 14 per 100,000, it's like, oh, well, small number. But then it's like, do the math. How long were we in a particular war? How many years? And then compare the absolute numbers. And it's like, oh, wow, we are lopping ourselves off rather. It's like, it's bad. How many of these people could have lived full and wonderful lives if they had just gotten past the thing, whatever that thing was for them, right? What kind of value could they have had to themselves and those around them, the country, society, whatever? We don't know.
No, you don't. And you can't know what they were going through either.
Often, yeah. That was the other thing that was brought up in the conversation where some of this is conjecture. Well, every situation is unique and individual. But is this sort of jokingly, but very really said, males are better at executing the act of suicide. Mm-hmm. How much of the female suicide attempt is a call? It's an externalized call for help. It can be seen, it can be acted upon. Whereas how many calls for help in males are exactly the same, but like on a biological level, sort of like the same, but the way they happen is all internalized, and therefore no one but the person experiencing that can act on it until the gun goes pop, right?
So what you're saying is that there are other signals that would be coming from the male perspective that would be like, I think I follow what you mean here. So basically that there are other more subtle signals like cries for help that you're getting from the...
I don't know, or you can't perceive them at all. I'm not sure. Like,
okay. Yeah. I mean, then this is a cry for help if you can't perceive it. That's part of the point of the cry. That's just internalizing it and not processing at that point, I feel. Or compartmentalizing.
Okay, so it would be lovely to have some of these questions like answered by someone who knows something.
Right.
What I'm trying to disentangle is like, if the male suicide rate is so high relative to women, I think one of the narratives is that men use heavier means of violence and do it, and women often start with lesser means of violence and don't do it. So that has been the explanation for the disparity in the number. I'm asking, and I think Reeves, or was it Chris? I don't know. There was another question of like, is some of the female biased behavior cries for help and it is externalized. Therefore, it can be acted on, and therefore there's less suicides as absolute number, versus the male side where the cries for help are only internalized. They're never externalized. Therefore, no one else can act upon them. It would take the act of the person going through it to do something, and that often isn't going to happen.
There you go. Now
then you get to the gun pop, and the dude's gone.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's gotta be. There's got to be some sense of truth to that. Some truth to that. Yeah. I don't know what how much of the phenomenon it explains, but I would think it definitely is a contributing factor for sure. Just knowing how, I mean, it's a reason that the sitcom dad is stereotyped as not being open and emotional, and it's a stereotype because
kind of being a flubber.
It's in there, right? It's part of the. I don't know if it's like that in every country, but it's part of definitely at least part of the American.
Or it has been amongst our generation, culture. I suppose.
Yeah. Yes.
And then it's like, in psychology or performance psychology or something, those things like that. It's like, be careful what you think, because then you'll be, right? And so as a society, are we just like, we all latched onto Homer, and therefore we're all just on our path towards being Homer. And it's kind of sad, right?
Exactly. Like, it's like, it gives you the excuse. Mm-hmm. Because you have other examples of, oh, well, I'm not the only one that would be like this. This is like, it makes it feel, I don't know.
This goes back to like the lack of role models.
Yeah.
Really, like at the ground level, I feel like that's kind of like, if you were to be the puppeteer of society real quick and be able to like wave a magic wand and do one act on this particular problem. Wouldn't it be Jim like create? Yeah, wouldn't it be just magically create 5, role models in different age cohorts that people could latch onto that are actually, wholesome and gravitational?
I mean, gravitational, absolutely. Wholesome is very subjective, I feel.
I know. I don't have a more precise word.
If I were trying to start a government movement or something, absolutely. Like, that would be how I would want to go about,
Smokey the Bear
building, and then is it the I like their discussion of charisma versus charm. Do you want those people to be, charismatic? Or do you want them to be charming?
It's yin and yang all the way down, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter which particular word, which particular description, which particular trait you're going to pull on. There is a dark side and a light side to every single trait.
Exactly.
So what you want, and it's okay, so better explanation or a better way of putting it, not wholesome, but the light side. Practicing traits that are attractive, that people want in their role models, but they practice them almost exclusively to the light side. It is the Jedi versus Darth Vader.
Okay. Can you help crystallize a bit, like what some of the traits on the light side versus dark side would be?
The only hope. Sorry, I couldn't help.
No, it's fine. Can you help crystallize for me what some of the traits on the light side versus dark side would be in this instance, in the way you're thinking about it?
What triggered it for me was you saying like charming and charismatic. Like, I think about those words and I'm like, there's a light and a dark side, right? Am I trying to seduce someone into a situation that they really should not be part of? A business deal, a dark alley thing, whatever, right? Like charm and charisma can be used darkly, or that's a terrible on the dark side. I feel like I just keep coming back to Star Wars.
To clarify, like, this struck me, like, so charm is like where you see them and you feel like that person would like you, right? Is that kind of like the definition of charm, or you're kind of like that person, like, versus, no, I'm butchering this now. Forget it. Move on. We'll cut it out.
But going back to like light and dark side, I think, can't generosity have a light and a dark side, right? If your model is too generous to the point where like they're ruining their own lives or the lives of their family or something like that. That's not
Mm-hmm.
good, right? Like there's infinite ways of describing each trait and showing its light and dark side. But what you would want out of a role model is one that is displaying the most positive light side traits of someone in that particular stage of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's 65, 45, 25, and you're going to have like, and I don't want to make it sound like it's, they're infallible or without mistake or regret.
That's what I was gonna say. I think we have to like also when we're talking about like this role model concept, like I'm getting this vision of like this 1950s type role model where it's just pure. It's like a purity thing of like it's pure good. It's not they don't have negative qualities or traits. Like much like today, I think it's much harder for people to kind of become role models. I mean, I shouldn't say it doesn't happen, or like I guess any public figure in a way is by de facto a role model for anybody that's observing, really. So but our role models now are maybe much less clean and tidy than they used to be. So
we get more of their lives now. I would say.
Exactly.
It's not cleaned. You can't call up.
You're not getting a filtered pass through a high pass, low pass filter of like here's the middle of the vision that we want you to see. It's no, here's everything.
Yeah. Well, you used to always go through filters, right? Like if you were going to get press, you went through the press. Now you could just post to your Instagram profile, and then it's like, whoa, that didn't go to plan.
Yeah. They didn't have canceling back in 1955.
Well, I don't know. McCarthyism.
Well, okay. You know what? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's always been around. It's just
always been around. It's just bigger
harder to enact
or more distributed now. It's more distributed now. Like along with atomization, you get a different kind of distribution.
Well, just the way information passes so readily and easily. It's like our discussion last time about what does a guy in Texas have to talk to about a guy in Maine, really that matters to either of them in their lives. But this concept of, oh, well, now we're all suddenly against liking this one person online because they said fart and I don't like that or whatever. And honest, and some for very good reasons.
For very good reasons. The shame part of society is a useful part of how tribes and groups of people have managed themselves forever.
Absolutely. Like they used to excommunicate people a lot more because just it was a shaming of them, right? Or banishing them into a different island, just making them out of the group, essentially.
Yeah, but what about the town drunk?
I mean, you have comic relief too, right?
There's that, but I often kind of wonder, like, if the town drunk wasn't violent and wasn't predatory.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the town.
But like those were like I would like to think that those were the lines. You get predatory, you get violent, you get you're gonna not be asked.
Yeah, that's true.
You're gonna leave.
That's true. But yeah, like was it? Yeah, the Andy Griffith Show, I think, where they had the town drunk that was always in the cell, and he'd let himself in and out.
Yeah.
They left the key within reach so he could let himself out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more of a commentary on the modern homeless system than I really think about, like people committing crimes just to go in and be able to get a hot meal and off the street for a few nights in some situations.
Yeah, and that record of arrest is like it begets more, or could beget more bad behavior, because now it's like, well, you were arrested yesterday. How am I supposed to hire you?
Yes, I think there's that. Yes, that can also spiral in a negative way. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about this. Are there any other than Richard Reeves' website, which I'll link to this podcast we've been talking about, and his website in our show notes. Any other recommendations you'd make for anybody that's thinking about this and wants to explore a little deeper?
Yeah. I mean, Scott Galloway is huge, right? But I think he did a TED Talk recently. It's a 2-part TED Talk. And a lot of it is generational, but I think a lot of it's generational. That talk, but some of it has to do with, I don't even want to use the word gender at this point, right? Like some of it has to do with like your perceived station in life. And yeah, the more I think about it, the more I just kind of wonder, how do you get okay with your station in life? Especially for those who didn't have it modeled at home and need to find some other model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, and the
So,
point. Yeah. Anyway.
who did have it modeled well at home? Is my question.
Well,
I mean, like that's tangential. We'll come back to that, but
I think I did,
okay.
but my parents were, they have plenty of flaws themselves. They're human. I think part of, maybe a portion of the problem is that we expect, like going back to these fabricated role models, we expect perfection when that means we should expect failure, because perfection is not achievable. We're human and we're fallible.
Yes, I think and also expecting perfection, I think delays so many good actions too. When because
Perfection is the enemy of done.
You want to have everything just perfect and like figured out before you go. And the thing is, life is much more iterative than we give it really credit for. And effing up is going to be a good thing, because you're going to be able to take something away from that and go back and retry and plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, act as a cyclical loop. I mean, I believe, like, I am so anti-perfection. A, because I'm a mess. I'm a hot mess myself. But B, it just stands in the way of you moving forward. I even have a pair of custom Chuck Converse to say "Progress, not perfection," all the way around the side.
I like it. Progress, not perfection.
Yeah. Because we cannot.
You will be in stasis your entire fucking life if you don't.
Exactly.
Get stuff done.
You cannot just sit still. You have to move forward, and your first step forward might actually be a step back, but then your next step after that will be 2 or 3 steps forward. That's the way I think about it. But certainly there are things you want to be as prepared for and have everything, if you're performing open heart surgery, a little more perfection, please. But when we're talking about self-improvement, I think in the context that's, I think, the context which we're really thinking about this here is, helping improve yourself and improve the way you attack problems and attack life and feel about your station in life, is that, okay, today maybe I didn't get what I needed to get done, or I feel shitty about not having gotten everything on my to-do list knocked off, or, oh, I totally forgot to get back to that one person's email. Whatever it can be, because there will be something that will eat at you, and you'll be laying there in bed at 11 that just, like, all of a sudden I can't stop thinking about this and I can't sleep because of it. But like, what you have to be able to, in my opinion, one thing that can help is realizing, well, am I better off today than I was yesterday? Did I move forward on maybe not what I wanted to, the thing that's eating away at me, but what did I achieve, and did I make progress, and did I?
This is a gratitude practice. You're trying to count the positives when your mind is biased toward counting all the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so sometimes you have to step back and deliberately count the good. I've talked about this recently with a friend where, like, professionally, I feel like nothing is going terribly, nothing is going well. And so I focus on that pillar. Therefore, when that pillar isn't working, my entire life is in shambles. And then it's like, okay, step back. How is your family? My family's good. How is where you live? Where I live is awesome. All these different things, right? And it's like, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your life? Oh, it's like an 8. So you're telling me just because of work, it's a 1. But when you actually sit back and look at it all from a 30,000 foot view, you're like, oh, it's an 8.
The problem is that those other things are almost, there's a lot less variance in those, right? So
perhaps.
So they're being good feels just normal and mundane and not exciting, and
you take it for granted. This is why gratitude practice can be so useful. Mm-hmm. Remind yourself of what you're taking for granted.
And I think it's also, and take inventory. I think also then the taking inventory of what's going well and not well, then you know where you want to put your focus too, right? It's
Oh
like,
yeah,
okay,
that's really good.
then I need to, here's the things, the top three things that are bothering me. What actions, like we talked about this last time again, like you're making yourself, you're a news of the day of whoever you are. Dan or Sean is making their own news of the day of themselves of how that day's events go. Here's the top three things that went wrong. Well, okay, you have the ability to in your news feed, your mental news feed, say, here's things I can act about that I'm putting in my mental news feed, and then trying to think about how you're going to act upon them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really good medicine that aligns with some of the really hard stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Which is like, if you're in a bad spot, I mean, I don't, the deepest, darkest spot is one where it's like, man, seek help, right? But like, if you're just, I don't know, in the dark gray or something like that, it's like, what? But just sit down and write down what actions you could take to begin the improvement. Because, the analogy I lean on over and over and over and over again is like a flywheel, big, heavy flywheel. And we've got several big, heavy flywheels in our lives. And when a flywheel stops spinning, it can feel terrible. And it's really, really hard to get it spinning again. But what can you do to get it moving just a little bit? Because if you can move it a little bit, moving it the next little bit is easier and easier and easier until you got a flywheel that's spinning and you've got energy and things feel good.
The laws of physics somehow meant to apply to mental processes in a weird way. I agree with you that the concept of static friction versus dynamic friction and momentum are definitely work in mental processes and emotional processes as well.
Can you throw some entropy in there for us?
Absolutely. I mean, as things progress, you don't know what's going to happen that's going to set you off course, right? Like you think you're on your path and everything's going good, but all of a sudden something happens and the energy levels change, and your chaos is ensued, and things naturally degrade to chaos.
And then it's real easy to get back in that mental state of like, why me? Why now?
It takes work to keep things on certain paths, and like, not that everything has to. And one thing I want to be careful about stressing here, or that I would like to stress here, is that not everything has to be pre-planned on a path and meeting like specific goals. I don't think. I think a lot of
you want chance.
Yeah, I think and you want some variability and joie de vivre in there.
Yeah. Good call on that one. I'm trying to think of the opposite word in French.
Ennui? No.
Ennui. That's what I was thinking about.
Oh, really?
Is that the right?
Yeah, if you're just full of actually, yeah. I'm sorry.
Ennui versus joie de vivre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe not.
No, it is.
That's
You're
actually
it is French. It's funny. It's funny. I looked up ennui to share with somebody a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, the word you're looking for is ennui, I think. And I was like, wait, let me double check the definition. And yeah, it's like, oh yeah, French word. Yeah. Here it is. Here's the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
I know you just said, what's the opposite of joie de vivre? Yeah, it would be ennui. You're absolutely right. Well, yeah.
So anyway, you asked for like other materials or something like that. I would point to, there'd be two other books that I would like throw at you, or like people to find on podcast episodes to sort of check in with. And one would be Arthur Brooks. He wrote a book called How to Know a Person. I think it's a beautiful book. And it's all about community and getting to know other humans. Going back to sort of role models, the knitting of community, not feeling less alone. All these things are, central to being a human. And he wrote this book, and he's a very analytical, logical, introverted journalist, academic type person, right? And I kind of identify with him and his soul. And then reading his book, I'm like, there's lots of little important things in there.
You said How to Know a Person?
I think that's what it's called, yeah.
I have a David Brooks, How to Know a Person.
What did I say? Arthur Brooks?
Yeah, who wrote From Strength to Success and
David
some other
Brooks.
stuff.
Yeah. Arthur Brooks. Also, you could, yes. I get the Brooks.
The Brooks Brothers? They also make suits.
Yes. In the airport.
Yes. Only at the airport. It's the only place I ever see a Brooks Brothers is at an airport.
Yeah.
Although I guess I haven't really gone to the mall in a while, to be fair.
I haven't either. Yeah, I'm bad at that. I do have some Brooks Brothers polos that I bought on Amazon of all places. $30. So, and then the other one I would point out is Jonathan Haidt. In part because like we're sitting here talking about guys, and you can't fix the guy problem without also helping fix the girl problem. I think these things are in tandem. I think they're like out of balance. But Jonathan does a really good job of sort of, I mean, he's kind of like on a war against social media right now, but I forget which one of his books, but like almost any of his talks, you'll be able to find him talking about the girl suicide rate. And, in large part, it feels like men go through this really difficult trough from like, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to name some numbers, 22 to 30 or something like that. Right. And if you don't catch them in that time, and then the whole trajectory is a bit off. Girls, it seems like, and this is a white guy talking stuff, it seems like 12 to something in the teens is like a similar kind of trough where like self-confidence just completely gets obliterated. A little bit more wandering, and if you don't catch them in that time, or then things don't go on the trajectory that perhaps could have been. Something along those lines. I'm painting with a real broad brush here.
And was that the anxious generation you're referring to?
I think I didn't read that book. I've circled around it through listening
he
to
has
him.
that, and then The Coddling of the American Mind are the two.
That one's really, really good, but that one's definitely I don't know. I really like The Coddling of the American Mind. The first Haidt book that I read was before B School, and then it was a prescribed book in B School, which was The Happiness Hypothesis.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for the tips on digging a little deeper into some tough topics that I like. Not that you are ever going to say anything here that solves any of these problems.
But getting that out in the open, this is like therapy, right? Like if there isn't a place if there isn't a place to take these topics, I mean, it's just you and I talking here, so it's not like but if any of this ever encourages, or like what something Galloway says, something Haidt says, something Brooks says, or either of the Brookses, this is moved someone's life in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also I think it's as you age and move through these phases of life, it's, I think, useful to have tools at hand for self-reflection and helping move as you transition through the
gauntlet that is life.
Yeah. The many deaths that is life, I feel like.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. The many deaths. Man, you got some bangers today. There's another little thing that I would like to add, because I feel like I didn't touch it when I was talking about it previously, which was, this is why I just lost it again.
I've been doing that all morning here. I keep having these little, my neurons are
not fired up yet.
I don't know.
Oh, the comment on Christine Emba's YouTube video. That top comment of like, everything's fine, 55, guessing it, 55-year-old guy or something like that.
Yeah.
What I can't remember if I addressed or not is, shouldn't that guy be giving back?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that guy be a role model to someone younger? Shouldn't a responsible guy who is hopefully watched the whole video before commenting and seeing that there is such a deep divide and problem triggered in his mind of, perhaps I can do something, rather than just typing a comment saying everything's fine, get on with it?
And yeah, exactly. And why would somebody be responding in that way, right? I mean, because I think, as you said, they're tired and angry, right?
Yeah,
it's a defensive
selfishness
reaction
at the top.
It's like anybody who's human and taking like other people at face value, which is hard to do because we have inundated ourselves with all these constant streams of emotion. So it gets overwhelming, and I think anger and annoyance are rational reactions. In listening to Richard Reeves. He was telling of a story when they were he was at a conference talking about with another one of his colleagues who talking about the need for more light on men's
Male
mental health
issues.
and these other
Yeah.
issues. And they were there speaking with a woman colleague, a feminist colleague, who at the end commented to Richard, I had to keep reminding myself that rationally I agree with everything this guy is saying, but I'm put off because he's coming across as so angry because, and it's like, I rationally agree with his points, but the tone in which we're pushing back is not productive. It's as Tim Urban would put it, we're in our Gollum minds. We're tribal and not thinking we're down here on the lower level tribalness, just back and forth below sports fans. Even when we need to be up in those higher minds of like, here's a way to have a discussion. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to be 100% pure in alignment, but we need to at least understand where each other is coming from and to understand why that person feels that way. And when you have a comment on a YouTube video that just says, everything seems fine to me, that is the most dismissive, I think you were right. It feels like it comes from anger or from some other place that's not productive in a successful dialogue. I don't know, my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that point that was brought up in the Reeves interview was perfect because it feels like the dialogues almost always start at anger, right? And it's like, well, there's going to be zero, if anything, you're pushing each other away. Like the pie, you're actively making the pie smaller.
Yes. It's a zero-sum game at this point. There's a winner.
With the way players are playing, but you can play this game in a different way and the pie can grow.
Yes. Yeah. Everybody's looking to take a slice away at this point rather than figuring out how to make it a bigger piece or a bigger pie.
Okay. So Jim O'Shaughnessy, we're going to incept people with the thought that almost all games in life are positive sum. And just
I agree.
See how everything changes from that point on.
Yeah. Try to say, hey, I'm not trying to beat this person because only one of us is going to walk away a winner here. Look at it, because everything is a game in a way. Every little conversation, negotiation, email exchange you have with somebody, it can be an experience where both of you come away better, more well off. I don't know how to say exactly what I'm trying to put in words there, or where one person takes advantage of the other, one person gets something out, the other doesn't. I mean, not every, a simple little, hey, how's it going? Not necessarily that type of exchange, but, or just a purely, here's an invite to anyway, I'm not giving good examples. No, but yeah, everything can be, if you try to put in as well as just be extractive, overall, it becomes you're much more likely to have, I think, a rewarding experience.
Did you read Adam Grant's Give and Take?
No, I have not read that one.
That was a good one. I like Adam Grant a lot. I really like him a lot.
This is great because I have there's a promo if I go ahead and burn 3 credits before sometime in November, I get a free one. So I'm like, I'm just adding all these to my list.
Largely, it's like society breaks down into givers, takers, and matchers, and the majority are matchers, and the minority are either givers or takers. The givers tend to do best and worst because some give too much and or give wrongly. He's going to be much better explaining than I will be.
They let like the emotional vampires really take advantage and drain.
Well, that's when he brings in the group dynamics of like sometimes having the giver be the leader is the best structure or something like that. But you need matchers within the group. Otherwise, if a taker comes in, the group will get taken over. But if it has matchers who sort of like on a game theory level, if it's opponent plays positive, then you play positive. If opponent plays negative, you play negative, right? That's kind of like the matcher strategy, and which is the optimal game
I'm
theory.
looking forward to that one. Okay,
strategy, right?
Oh.
So you have matchers in the group, and they sort of they kind of eject the takers or suppress them, make them less powerful.
Okay, I like that. That sounds promising. Okay, beautiful.
Which is and then trying to like make a broad takeaway, right? If you find the majority of us are going to be matchers, right? But then you're like, oh, but givers do best. I want to be a giver. I don't know if you're going to be able to change your wiring and makeup, but it's a good reminder of every single situation that you go into in life. Try to play the positive game.
I agree.
I think that's sort of the orientation that gets givers to be on the highest part of the upside of the scale, right? Like it's that orientation that gets them there. And if you as a matcher can remind yourself of that orientation before playing any game, and then letting the matcher in you take over if you find yourself with a taker, you've kind of optimized the game a little bit.
That's well said. It reminds me of one of the best pieces of marriage advice I ever heard on a comedy podcast of all places. But nice. That the best marriages work out a lot better if both sides are trying to put in 60%.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah,
because you're not always going to be able to be there. Some days you're only going to be able to put in 30 or 40, but then the other side's got you on those days.
It's like a savings account in some way. Like if you want to break it down into
kind of. I mean, it's an emotional savings account. Connection bond. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I've heard it talked about like in the work context as social capital.
Yes, social capital.
Right, like you can only go and ask for the big thing so many times before people are like, "What are you doing?" Yeah,
and without yielding results, as well.
Right,
like you have to, you can. Boy who
that's
cried
kind of
wolf.
like it's an account. It's got to be grown.
Yes, exactly. It's got to be exactly. You have to have returns and in and out. It can't just be one way.
Yeah,
otherwise
100%.
It'll just drain and be empty. So
yeah, which goes back to like, do you want to die with do you want to be so cheap in your entire life that you die with a bunch of money? No, you also want to spend it. It's social capital. It's social, or it's real capital. It's like,
that's you can't take it with you with social capital at all. So
you can't take any of it with you.
Yeah. So definitely use it and spend it and make sure you're
no, that's an interesting point. So social capital, in the context of a job, you don't want to use it.
You still want to end up with a lot of social capital because that means you had a lot of goodwill, right? So
yeah. Dying with goodwill is actually a good thing on that front, I would say.
Like, I'd rather die penniless with a ton of social capital than anything, probably.
Yeah. The attendance list at your funeral is extremely long. Well, that sounds like a life well lived.
Yeah. Well, speaking of funerals, I think that's about the end of this episode. Maybe put a button on it there, right on the happy note. What do you think, Dan?
I think so too. It's been a good Saturday with you, Sean.
All right, it's been a wonderful Saturday morning chatting here with my buddy Dan. Thanks for everybody for tuning in to our perhaps a little darker than usual conversation at times, but I think still
light.
I was going to say still
toward the light. I mean,
toward the light, and I think meaningful.
Yeah. I hope
please,
so.
Please leave us a review, like or subscribe. Thanks for tuning in to Unqualified Advice. We'll talk to you next time.
Cheers, everyone.